Guys, welcome to the channel. The channel is The Layman. This is a channel where we dedicate, to the accumulation of insights and things, principally from the idea that our wisdom consists in the knowledge that we know nothing. So we go into the dark areas where sometimes we don't want to tread, in order to exchange bad ideas for better ideas. And today we are going to be looking at none other than Sean Carrol. Guys, listen, I'm not scared of Sean Carrol, okay? Sean Carrol is a brilliant physicist and theoretical physicist, I believe. He's also a pretty astute philosopher. If you read his books, he goes pretty deep into philosophy, has some really compelling conversations with Sam Harris, and I think he kind of gets the better. He's, in my estimation, the only scientist who actually bested Dr. William Lane Craig in a debate. Don't at me for that. Go watch the debate. I'm a fan of Dr. Craig. I've met him in person. But look, I'm a Christian apologist. We're going to be taking a look at what Sean Carrol has to say about, God does not exist. And I'm very, very glad that we have the light fluffiness of Lex Friedman to buffer what might be a traumatic fall. So let's watch this. Let's see what Sean Carrol has to say about God's existence here.
You're a believer of the mechanistic universe. You're a naturalist, and as you've described, a poetic naturalist.
That's right.
What's the word poetic? What is naturalism, and what is poetic naturalism?
I think I'm a poetic naturalist. I just like the way that sounds. What is a poetic naturalist? Let's see.
Naturalism is just the idea that all that exists is the natural world. There's no supernatural world.
Whenever I hear this, I kind of wonder what's meant by either of those terms. Like the term supernatural is not, you're not going to find that in like the Bible or the Quran, or the Lotus Sutra. Supernatural, I think, is a word that was coined in like the late 16th century, and it just kind of meant things which science hadn't figured out yet, or the unknown, right? So unless he unpacks what exactly he means by supernatural or natural, I don't know if we've got much of a definition.
Naturalism is just the idea that all that exists is the natural world. There's no supernatural world. You can have arguments about what that means, but
Okay,
I would claim that the argument should be about what the word supernatural means, not the word natural. The natural world is the world that we learn about by doing science.
Gotcha. So he's saying there's some world out there that you can't learn about by direct inquiry. I would suggest, for instance, being an idealist, I would say that if you're saying that there's anything outside of consciousness which gives rise to consciousness, this would pair with Sean Carroll's definition of supernatural to me, right? I mean, if something is outside of consciousness, that means that it is banned from investigation by definition. It can't even be discovered in principle. It's just kind of this well, it's not a hypothesis. A hypothesis would be systematically prepared for some kind of justification. But, let's continue here.
The poetic part means that you shouldn't be too, I want to say, fundamentalist about what the natural world is. As we went from Newtonian space-time to Einsteinian space-time, something is maintained there. There is a different story that we can tell about the world. And that story in the Newtonian regime, if you want to fly a rocket to the moon, you don't use general relativity. You use Newtonian mechanics. That story works perfectly well. The poetic aspect of the story is that there are many ways of talking about the natural world. And as long as those ways latch on to something real and causally efficacious about the functioning of the world, then we attribute some reality and truth to them.
So
I kind of appreciate and this is what I meant by him being a pretty smart in his philosophical understanding of things, is because he understands, I think, that all these scientific truths are going to kind of disintegrate in the current of development. Things are always developing, things that are always changing. But as long as what you believe is in alignment with something which is either testable or at least life applicable. I mean, I don't necessarily want to say that everything true must be testable, because that statement itself isn't testable and then becomes self-referentially incoherent. But life applicable, at least.
So the poetic really looks at the let's say the pothead questions at the edge of science, is more open to them.
It's doing double duty a little bit, so that's why it's confusing. The more obvious respectable duty it's doing is that tables are real. Even though you know that it's really a quantum field theory wave function, right? Tables are still real. They're a different way of talking about the underlying deeper reality of it. The other duty it's doing is that we move beyond purely descriptive vocabularies for discussing the universe onto normative and prescriptive and judgmental ways of talking about the universe. This painting is beautiful, that one is ugly. This action is morally right, that one is morally wrong. These are also ways of talking about the universe. They are not fixed by the phenomena. They are not determined by our observations. They cannot be ruled out by a crucial experiment. But they're still valid. They might not be universal. They might be subjective, but they're not arbitrary. And they do have a role in describing how the world works.
One of the things I've always appreciated about Sean Carroll is how careful he is. He's like, look, I'm not just going to hand wave away ethics and, things which are not determinable by, some kind of scientific experiment. And I think that it just kind of shows that there's a little bit of wisdom. And I don't want to say a little bit, I don't know how wise Sean Carroll is, but it's like people who, I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. People who are like just getting into physics or just getting into philosophy assume that they know everything. And they do these sweeping generalizations of like, oh, this whole domain is nonsense. And then this whole domain is, one that should, relax. I appreciate Sean Carroll for that.
But they're not arbitrary.
Right.
And they do have a role in
For
describing how the world works.
So you don't think it's possible to construct experiments that explore the realms of morality and even meaning? So those are subjective.
Yeah. They're human. They're personal.
I'd go a little bit further than Sean in saying that they're personal and that they're human or that they're purely subjective. I believe that we are being impinged upon by a fundamental kind of reality. And this is where Sean is going to abandon me and be like, okay, if you're saying that, now you're getting into the spooky. Now you're getting into this weird, thing. But I definitely believe, and I know that we're going kind of into the territory of beliefs. Just let me kind of say it. If I started to do like an English accent, which I can do a fairly good English accent if I actually give it a try. I've never been to London. I've never been to England, but I can do a fairly good English accent, probably because of my background in audiobooks. I read audiobooks for a living, and sometimes I would get a character who had this kind of accent, so I would do it. But the more I do this accent, the more I'm impinged upon by my American accent. I want to go back to what's normal and what's natural. And it's possible that when we're talking about morality, what we really mean is we are being impinged upon by like a rest state to where evil makes us cringe because what is fundamental is not evil, right? In the same way that this accent is making me internally tired and exhausted because it's not my natural state. This is what a phenomenologist like Rupert Spira might suggest in critique of this particular bit of what Sean Carroll is. Okay, so back to my American accent.
Or just those are subjective.
Yeah. They're human. They're personal.
But do you think that's just because we don't have the tools of science have not expanded enough to incorporate the human experience?
No, I don't think that's what it is. I think that what we mean by aesthetics or morality are we're attaching categories, properties to things that happen in the physical world. And there is always going to be some subjectivity to our attachment and how we do that. And that's okay. And the faster we recognize that and deal with it, the better off we'll be.
But I wonder how Sean Carroll would explain the similarities across cultures, right? And I think that there are differences, though the differences tend to be superficial. Across cultures, you could see that like betrayal is a bad thing, murder is a bad thing, rape is considered a bad thing, right? And of course, there's going to be the nerds that come after me and say, well, there's these cultures that I'm talking about in general, leaving aside. Don't turn the general rule into a universal rule. I know that there are slight exceptions, but what would Sean have to say about the fact that there are these fundamental similarities across cultures, right? It has to be something within us. It's like, imagine you were studying an ant colony. you wouldn't say, that the hive mind that arises out of this colony is a result of each individual subjective experience. There's something deeper that they're reaching towards. It's more than subjective, and it's less than objective. I'll put it that way. Maybe it's transjective, to borrow a term from Dr. John Vervaeke.
And how we do that, and that's okay. And the faster we recognize that and deal with it, the better off we'll be.
But if we deeply and fully understand the functioning of the human mind, won't be able to incorporate that.
No. That will absolutely be helpful in explaining why certain people have certain moral beliefs. It won't justify those beliefs as right or wrong.
Do you think it's possible to have a kind of general relativity, but that includes the observer effect where the human mind is the observer?
Sure.
Sort of like how we morph in the same way gravity morphs space-time. How does the human mind morph reality and have a very thorough theory of how that morphing actually happens?
That's a very pothead question, Lex. But
I'm sorry. But don't you think it's possible?
But the answer is yes. I think that there's no.
Right.
I think that we're part of the physical world and the natural world.
We are by saying we are part of the physical world. He's saying we as in our body, our parts. And that may be a modal confusion on Sean Carroll's part. It is beyond me to suggest that about him. Let me know in the comments. Is he saying that we are our bodies? And, maybe as a scientist, he would say, look, if you're not your body, show me the part of you that isn't. But in asking, because maybe this is the question, because I'm starting to ramble a little bit. This is the question that I would have for Sean Carroll if I ever met him and spoke to him on this issue. Jesus suggested that we should identify as a way of being as opposed to a human being, right? Jesus said, I am the way. And so isn't it true that underneath my superficial visual self, right, this low resolution image of me, that behind that there is a series of patterns that people call Biscuit or Lamont, which is my real name. And he talked about that kind of at the beginning of this video, where it's like, yeah, the table is real and the processes that underlie the table are real. But the processes that underlie myself, right, those are not seeable, not tasteable, not touchable. To say that they're physical or that they follow a pattern, yeah, I guess that's true. I don't know. I haven't heard him say that God doesn't exist, though.
Physicalism would have been just as good a word to use as naturalism, maybe even a more accurate word, but it's a little bit more off-putting. So I do want a snappier, more attractive label than physicalism.
I don't know. Did he mention that God doesn't exist? He mentioned that the supernatural doesn't exist, but I don't consider God supernatural. I don't typically use that word. I agree with Caroll that there aren't really good definitions for terms like that. Anyway, sorry for bloviating a little bit too much, but when you're looking at somebody like Sean Carroll, he just has a lot of deep thoughts in rapid succession. So let me know what you think.